Evening all, I'm Jon Smith and welcome back to the Forum. Now, a lot of emotion in the studio over the last few weeks and months. Tonight it's about information, a veritable feast of fascinating facts, or so they tell me. What do you want to talk about? It's your show, perhaps the England game, perhaps the Olympic legacy. We're 3 months since those heady days of the summer. How are we doing? Are we doing well? And also I want to talk about respect. Respect across a number of different barriers and respect about how you feel about each other, how you feel about race, how do you feel about issues in the game, and particular, how do you feel about the referee, because no one seems to like him. I can't believe this, but I'm sitting here, I'm walking around London today, and it is nearly Christmas time. So in keeping with the festive mode, I've imported 3 wise men. So I couldn't resist that one, excuse me. Christian Malcolm, Commonwealth bronze medalist and sprinting icon. You're very welcome. Mark Palios, former Chief Executive of the Football Association, actually one of my favourite Chief Executives because somebody who I didn't have a row with. And a man who, over the years, I've grown to respect enormously for his articulation and his intelligence in the world of football, something that's reasonably quite rare. David Gold, a man who puts his wealth where his heart is, the co-owner of West Ham United, and lots of other things besides that. OK, chaps, how do we feel about the England game very quickly last night before we take the questions? Mark, let's start with you.
I think it was just one of those friendlies whereby people call them meaningless friendlies, and for 70 minutes or so, I think we did very well.
Should we have meaningless friendlies?
Well, I didn't say it was a meaningless friendly. So people call them meaningless friendlies. They all have a purpose, and the manager likes to see the players, etc. But you make those amount of changes, and you're going to see what you actually saw towards the end of the game, except for the exceptional goal, which is clearly the talking point.
And it was. So parking that for a second, as a club owner, David, are these just a rude interruption?
No, we hate them. As indeed,
okay, David, say how it is, will you please?
Well, managers hate them as well. The fear is, of course, that people go away on these so-called meaningless friendlies, and players come back injured, and it's devastating for a football club when everything seems to be going okay, and then a player comes back, and of course there'll always be influential players, otherwise they wouldn't be playing for their countries. We will have 3/4 of our squad will be away on so-called meaningless friendlies.
Now, Christian, you're a Man United supporter. That means you obviously weren't born anywhere near Manchester.
Bit on true.
As a fan, do you care?
As a fan, no. I enjoyed it.
Honest answer.
Honest answer, no. It don't really bother me. It's good to see the young talent coming through. It's good to see what the England boss is going to do and what his next move is. And to be honest with you, I'm Welsh, so I'm not really bothered about what England does.
Very quick question, Mark. Would this manager have got your appointment if you were chief executive at this time?
That's a difficult one. I mean, at the time I said that if your criteria was he should be English, then he's clearly in the frame, and he was in the frame with Harry Redknapp. And it depends on what you want. So from my experience, do you want somebody who's a great man manager because it's a different job being the manager of England, or do you want somebody who does what it says on the tin and creates a sort of a hard to beat side and gives confidence from that? I haven't answered the question.
Yeah.
The answer is maybe
you don't
not.
have to. I can come back to you on this one. You can ask a friend or phone a friend or ask. We don't have an audience.
I won't have
we do have a big audience out there. And your answer is?
I think at the time I would have potentially gone for Harry Redknapp, actually.
Okay, I think a lot of people would have said that.
And that isn't with hindsight. It's just that I felt that he'd done a good job in terms of man management. He'd built teams and they played in an attractive way. I think over the longer term, the England manager, of course, has to make the most out of the guys that he's got, and therefore, to some extent, if you've got a system and it's an unexciting system and you haven't got the players to take it that step further, you may just make quarter-finals in a tournament and nothing more than that.
Well, I think a lot of people would go with you, although I have to say I think Roy's doing quite a good job, even though he lost last
No,
night.
I think he's a good guy. He's a very experienced
guy.
And to have 2 choices who were English was
good,
a
wasn't
bonus.
it? Very good.
Yeah.
Quick question, David, before we take our first call of the night. I know you were at a Premier League meeting today, quite an important one. Anything particular came out of that?
Can I first, because I'd just like to say something about Roy. I think it was very, very brave of the FA, particularly David Bernstein, against the media, against public opinion. They went for Roy. and not
Harry.
And for me, I thought that was the right decision. I know a lot of fans will be thinking right now, okay, had a bad day yesterday, but remember that was a friendly, meaningless or otherwise.
Yes, and actually they were 2-1 up when he made the changes.
Yeah, and we shouldn't make a judgment on that game at all. What Roy has brought, which is what we all said all along for many, many years. I remembered saying it when Sven was appointed. I'm sitting watching Sven almost without emotion. You know, Sven would come on our breakfast TV and we'd sit there and we'd watch Sven and he's almost dull. And I liked Sven, but as a motivator, as a manager of England, who I think that it was so wrong that in my view, managers in the top 64 clubs in the world should just follow the same requirements that a player has. In other words, he has to be born in the country. He has to be an Englishman. Has to be.
It's a very valid point.
And that I think would stop all of this. You know, going out there and just picking some manager that we can't understand the language. So I was thrilled at the decision to appoint Roy.
Good. So 2-1 on the panel in favour of Roy. Very quick word before we take Dale. Anything pertinently wonderful or irrational came out of the Premier League meeting today?
No, all I can say about the Premiership, the Premier meeting today is everybody's working hard. A lot of unfinished business. Just to remind everybody, you know, it is difficult to come to final decisions at the Premier League because of the process, which requires 14 votes to 6 to sort of carry any real meaningful.
That's a tough call, that
yeah,
one,
it's very tough. I mean, I'm advocating that you know, that we really, in the future, we have to look at the Founders' Agreement, because 14 votes are required to make any changes. You'll end up never changing anything, and it's just difficult to move forward.
You see, that's why you need to watch Sports Tonight Live and the Forum, because you hear it from the horse's mouth. We have a first question of the evening from Dale O'Donnell. Now, Dale is a Man United fan, so Christian and you will get on great. Hello, Dale. How are you?
All right, thanks.
Well, what would you like to ask the panel?
The main, it's really towards David Gold, but the others, Mark and Christian, can give their views on it too. It's about football ownership, and we all have our opinions on that. Some fans like their owner, some don't. In 2005, Malcolm Glazer and his sons took over Manchester United, and there's been a lot of debt over a club's shoulders. I'm just wondering, what do people in David's position, how do they view the Glazers? And because I think everyone knows Manchester United fans aren't happy with them. Christian will tell you that too.
Well,
for a man who's put his hand in his own pocket for his club, that's an interesting question for you.
You know, what I have to say really, Dale, is that all fans, maybe not Manchester United because you are a super club, but most clubs would be looking for you know, millionaires to come in and improve their football club, change their fortunes. I mean, Stoke, for example, when not a super wealthy man, but a very wealthy man in Peter Coates, he came in and took Stoke City from the Championship into the Premier League, and of course fans will love that. They hate it when it goes wrong, but in the main, I think most fans would say that they'd like to take the risk. You could argue that it didn't work out, for example, at Birmingham. There was an issue where super wealthy came into Birmingham, and fans were absolutely excited about the prospects. And I remember the chairman saying he's going to spend 20 million the day he took over the club on transfer fees. And then he stopped and he said, no, 40 million. And of course the fans were ecstatic. Oh, by the way, and that was when 40 million pounds was a lot of money.
I was just going to say, in the case of Peter Coates, he's worth about 80 or 90 million, and we're sitting here saying, well, just maybe he's just not in that top bracket. I must pass this over to Mark as well, because this is an administrative nightmare, isn't it?
I think the issue for me was the question was Dale's question was about Manchester United and the Glazers coming in and putting a big debt burden on the club.
Yeah.
And just from my sort of accountancy background, I dealt with lots of companies, Dale, for many years whereby they went bust. And I used to hate debt. Debt was the thing that actually took most companies down. But what I have to say about the Glazers, and what have they been lucky, they've been successful on the pitch, which is what they had to do. But equally, they've also managed to get the debt burden down. Having said that, the interest on the debt last year, I think, was the same amount as they paid for Van Persie. So if they didn't have the debt, they could buy 2 Van Persies. But what they have done, and you've got to have some respect for, is they've managed to manage the club from a commercial perspective. And the Americans are pretty good at this, and they've done an excellent job at United off the pitch to get more cash in terms of the commercial brand that they've developed.
They've done very well.
I think you've got to give them credit for that. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, Chris and I were talking about this just before, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd have said there's still too much debt around the club. But today, you know, with the new television monies that are going to come as well, as long as they continue in the way that they are doing off the pitch, and for that they need to do it on the pitch as well, I think, you know, they've done pretty well.
Christian, that's a well-made point, but a quick point to you. There was reports in the national media that on the flotation, the Glazers extracted something around £70 million for themselves. Do you, as a fan, begrudge them that?
It does. You know, as a fan, when you hear this, you don't know what to expect. You just think they're just taking it for themselves. They're just worried. And the biggest concern...
But Mark did make some good points as well about what they're doing.
He made some great points. And the one thing for me, if Sir Alex is not worried, I'm not worried. and that's why I always keep saying to myself. But when you look at it and you look at the debt, which is mounted up, you know, you are concerned. What happens if we stop losing? What happens if Man City and Chelsea start to come along? You know, Chelsea just the other day announced that they're almost debt-free. And
so your feeling could potentially on the edge.
Yeah, it's on the edge at the moment.
The debt could topple you one side or the other, potentially.
Yeah, we don't know. And as fans, we don't know what's going on the inside. And I think that's what's getting everyone a little bit agitated as Man United fans at the moment. Yes, like Max said, they've been doing very well. But we don't really see that as much. We just think that the debt is growing up and they're dipping in to help themselves.
Let me quickly come back to you, Dale. I know David wants to say something in a second. Any particular thoughts that you've got after what the panel said, Dale?
Well, just the thing is that, just regarding what David said, there's some people think no matter what you do, you won't please football fans. And I think United fans in the past, I won't say we've never been happy with the business model of the club, but we haven't always been satisfied. But what I'm looking at is the health of the club. Yeah, we're winning things, no problem. That's great. But like Christian said, what happens if we stop winning things? What happens if we go through a few years? I wouldn't go to the extent of the few years Liverpool have gone through, because they've went through many. Hopefully we won't go down that road. But if we do go down a few years of fighting for the top four, what happens then? Because we're not winning titles. We've seen the effect not qualifying for knockout stage of the Champions League last year had, because the income wasn't as high as it usually is. And I think the other question is, if we did qualify for knockouts, would the Glazers have went for the IPO?
Okay, David, I know you were going to say something.
Well, I do have some experience of debt because, as you know, Dale, or as you probably know, when we took over at West Ham, there was £110 million worth of debt, not to the same level as Manchester United, of course. But I think going forward, I mean, it's all very well looking back, but it is what it is. I think it's 400 million at Manchester United, I'm guessing. I know it was 110 million at West Ham, and I'm not guessing. Look, what I would say is that going forward, at some time, this nettle has to be grasped. Now, whether it's grasped by FIFA, UEFA, or indeed by the Premier League itself, but I think it has to be grasped because I believe that debt has to be controlled. Now, you can't control it overnight. I know from my own experience, with a debt of 110 million, you need years. But what I would be saying is that as a percentage of turnover, so bigger clubs would be allowed to have a bigger debt to start with. Yeah. But if you then say, for example, the worst case scenario is a club with a £100 million turnover with a £100 million debt, that's 100% debt against turnover. If you start there and say, okay, this is the acceptable level for this year, but every year going forward forever. These debts have got to be reduced by a percentage, and it has to be punishment if you break those rules, because debt is definitely the evil of any business.
So you would agree with that, presumably, Mark, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, Dale, just again to give you a long time ago when I started out, I mean, as an accountant, you look at the ratios, and it's called a gearing ratio. And I went to a guy who was an old lag at this, and I said to him, what's the right level of gearing you should have for a company? And it depends on the industry and so forth. And he turned to me and he said, it isn't about percentages, it's about this. It's about having enough fat on your back to ride a run of bad luck. And that's essentially what I think you've been talking about, Christian's been talking about. And what I was trying to say was, a few years ago, they really had to be serially successful, Man United. It's a bit better than it was now, and they've actually increased the profits. So they're in a better position. But am I comfortable? You know, what happens when Sir Alex Ferguson goes? Have they got enough fat on the back to ride the run of bad luck? And the answer to that is, you know, it's a high level of debt at 300 odd million.
You've got a legacy. Sorry, David, go on.
But this wouldn't be an issue if there was no debt. So, you know, we have
But
to
is this a legacy of just the world that we came from? Up to 08, most of us who ran companies had debt on our balance sheets.
Oh, sure. No,
So
I understand. But there's absolutely no
living the legacy?
reason with an organisation with billions of income.
And now we have. So should and just very quickly before we go to a commercial break, should the clubs with debt be forced to pay down some of that debt as part of the Sky increase money, or the broadcast increase money?
Forced, I think we've got to come to an agreement between us. Manchester United will agree.
Sorry, forced is probably too strong a word.
But Manchester United would agree with me that we both need to reduce our debts. And in an ideal world, it would be wonderful that someday in the future there is no debt. And there's no reason, providing the income, which is growing and exponentially over the years from Sky and from all other sources, there is actually no reason why we should have debt. We've got it, but we could deal with it by reducing it steadily over a number of years, and in sometime in the future, no clubs would have debt, and that could be part of the rules of the Premier League.
Dale, that was a very good question because it prompted some serious discussion. So thank you very much. We look forward to hosting you again one day soon. We're going to go for a quick brew. So we'll be back in 2. I didn't want to say that because that was a bit corny, but we'll be back in a few. See you in a couple of minutes. Hi and welcome back to the forum. Now, we've got a lot of discussions going on here, so here's a little bit of information. I think at the bottom of your screen you should be able to see it. If not, Skype us please on STL Broadcast. You can tweet us at Sports Tonight TV. You can even use the old-fashioned telephone. We're here to take your calls. Now, we have a guy called Robert McCracken. Robert, are you out there? Are you here?
Yes, I am, yes.
Hello, Robert. You're very welcome. What's your question?
Hi, gents. I was just wanting to ask, after the Olympics, the praise for the athletes has been almost universal, and the public in the whole have really seemed to at least relate to them. I suppose it's not a direct comparison, but the way that the professional footballers anyway are perceived in the media and by the public is often very negative. We also know that so many fans feel removed from the footballers due to exorbitant wages, etc. And it's just there's a big gap between the fans and obviously the game. Is there? I think it's time to help bring footballers, as it were, back down towards the fans' level where they can relate with them more.
Thank you, Robert. Christian Malcolm.
I think it's a bit difficult for footballers. You know, football is played every week, and everybody wants to get to meet the football players, get there after the game, and all the footballers need to do is just, you know, I know as an athlete, if I was getting harassed week in, week out, I'd find it very difficult. You know, it's very hard to, I guess, engage with the athletes as such. But
so you say we can't compare the athletes with footballers?
No, you can't compare the athletes to footballers. A lot of people would argue the fact is the way the fans treat the footballers, but I don't think
is some of that about money, Christian?
Could be the money, could be the clubs. You know, the clubs like to protect their players. You know, they don't want their players going out mixing, and you know, as athletes, we're pretty much self-dependent. You know, it's down to us to go training every day. We have a coach that coaches us, but if we don't turn up, we don't turn up. As part of the footballers, they have contracted to play. You know, we run because we want the run. We don't run for the big money. We run for the accolade of becoming champions, winning medals. You know, and I think for us as athletes, you know, we mix it more every day with everyday people.
David, I know you're very active in the clubs that you have been involved with, Birmingham City and now West Ham. Do you get a sentiment from your players after the Olympics that they should be more engaging with the supporters, or is it just business as usual, or do you not find that there's an issue?
Well, first of all, no, I've not noticed a difference since the Olympics. Footballers aren't bad people, you know, by and large.
No, they get a bad rep, I know.
They do get bad press. But what I would say to you, Rob, is that I've got players at West Ham, and I've been in football for 20 years, and you get some players are very engaging, and they're very, you know, they want to embrace fans, and they do so at every opportunity. Others are a bit shy. In some cases, I've got players, can you believe this, that really are shy and can't face the media and can't face fans. So, you know, if you're having a bad experience, I would say that it's probably more out of bad luck than it is that they specifically feel that they don't want to engage with fans. It also has to be remembered that they're high profile, they easily get into trouble, you know, they get captured, people look to pick on them at times. So they only need one bad experience, and they won't want to engage fans.
I was going to pick up
again.
on that. I think it's a very valid part. I mean, Mark, I know you've dealt with the media considerably over the years.
Not as a player. They weren't interested as a player.
Well, even when you were at Tranmere, you mean?
Yeah.
But you know, I looked at the Daily Mail last week, and it had 10 pages of football and 3 pages of everything else. I mean, 10 pages of football is a lot to fill, and some of it's social. Yeah. Is it a media issue for us? I mean, I'm talking about an issue. We're not talking about major issues here, but there was this love of the British Olympians, and it would be great if it translated to football, wouldn't it?
I think, you know, everybody has to acknowledge that you know, the pureness of the Olympic spirit, to have it here on our doorstep and to see it firsthand, and actually the way in which, you know, I'm a Brit and I'm proud of it, the way in which we delivered it was fantastic. So, and everybody accepted that, and I think they immediately flipped to make comparisons with the national game. But as you say, you know, when I played, certainly there was about maybe 2 pages in the paper. You've now got to fill that amount of content. You've got 24/7 coverage, so the content creates the celebrity. But you know, this process in terms of the divorcing of fans from players and the distancing of players from fans has been going on over a long period of time, ever since the abolition of the maximum wage. I mean, way back at Tranmere, they tell tales of Pongo Waring, who travelled to the game on a bus, and he turned up with a black eye because he'd drunk away his bus fare, had a fight with the bus conductor, and went out and scored 9 goals. I mean, it's just, those were the days when it was entirely different. It is actually, as I say, it's a function.
Yeah, the world has moved on, even for athletes, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's tough for footballers. You know, they're on the TV week in, week out. Their fan base is far bigger than athletics. The Olympics, the home Olympics, it's the first time, you know, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The next time we get a home Olympics is going to be 50, 60 years' time. So we can appreciate that.
Beyond our grandchildren,
yeah. Yeah, and we can appreciate that now. With football is week in, week out, and footballers are everyday people, you know, and some footballers are having good days and some footballers are having bad days.
Are there days you sit there and go, oh, thank God I'm not a footballer?
Some days I do, and some days I look at my bank balance and think I wish I was a footballer. But
yeah. I mean, I'm involved in British Judo, so I saw the Olympics.
So you see both sides of it.
So I saw the Olympics through, you know, the British Judo Association. But I'll never forget an issue, you may remember it, David, when some Leicester players were accused, I think it was of rape, when they were out in La Manga.
I remember it well.
And it was a massive issue when I was at the FA, and I remember driving one night to a game, and in London, I was in a taxi and I looked at the Evening Standard, and it was all over the Evening Standard. When that eventually came to pass and they looked at the evidence, etc., they were found not guilty, no case to answer, etc., etc. And the rebuttal or the reporting of that was about 7 pages in, and it was about that big. But the damage had been done.
Absolutely. It's like, Mark, if someone says somewhere in the paper, Mark Palios is gay, it's difficult.
I'd sue them.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that,
yeah.
but for you, it might not be what you want to get across. It's very difficult for you to rebut that. So the media has a great responsibility here. Robert, you're a football fan. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I certainly think that the media's got a massive responsibility and a big part to play. It was interesting to hear the views of the panel there as well.
Yeah, I just feel that there is a balance between the media, isn't there? We need them in the sports industry, in the football industry, but we need them to behave sensibly as well. It's difficult for you as a club owner, isn't it, to get that balance right, David?
Well, I think it's a bit naive if we think anything's going to change. I mean, it is what it is.
Is that likely to change
Say
anything?
again?
Leveson likely to change anything?
I have my doubts, and I think it's reasonable to say that what we have now is likely to continue for some. You know, even Leveson is only going to tweak it. It's not going to impact upon the coverage that these issues bring. And you know, and I think Mark's made a fantastic point where you're talking about pages and pages and pages of a very bad press for football, and then you get a 5-liner in the middle of the paper to answer it.
Let me also ask you though, David, you have a club that pays sizable wages to football players. Do you have anybody in that club, especially if they're coming through from a young age and on, I don't know, 10, 20, 30,000, maybe more pound a week at a very young age, do you have anyone at that club who can hold that player's hand and say, you know what, this is a large amount of responsibility that you have now? Do you have an educational system
we
at
didn't.
the club?
If you go back 10 years, or maybe a bit more, certainly 15 years, no, there was no such function in the football club. Now, and certainly I remember a particular player that we brought from Arsenal that had a tag on his ankle, and he was a star, came to Birmingham, and we realised his talent. His talent was fantastic, you know.
Should have could have. Pennant, by the way.
Jermaine Pennant. Okay.
Sorry, I just thought I'd catch it on the first bounce.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay. I was thinking whether it was appropriate to mention his
No,
name, but
no,
now
you
that
shouldn't.
have,
But I
okay.
have.
And he wore a tag, and you knew that this boy was a great talent, but he had to be looked after. And I remember saying, look, I'm not your father, but I am here for you. And so I played a part, and then I realised that I needed more, and that's when we brought in a kind of semi-professional help and somebody to look after him through those early stages, and that then
that's
became
something
the
the game
norm.
has. That's something that the game has to consider, shouldn't it,
Christian,
Mark?
I mean, that's what
Isn't it,
happens
Mark?
as my understanding in terms of Olympic sports. We certainly have sort of, you know, psychologists and guys who can help, almost like life coaches.
Do you have that in
to help athletes?
But what I was going to say was, is football, do you find it hard because with footballers you have so many different characters and they're from so many different backgrounds, and it's trying to find someone to identify with that one player. You may have someone at the club there that can help, but he may not identify with one player, but can identify with 5 other players. So it's trying to find that one person, you know, that father figure there to put arm around on.
Here's something that might illustrate backwards what you've just said. We've had a tweet in from Robbie in Liverpool. After the rumours last weekend that Raheem Sterling's representatives were demanding £50,000 a week, do the panel think any 17-year-old footballer is worth that money? I could go anywhere with this question. Mark, I'm going to land it in your lap.
Right. The first thing was taking away whether Raheem Sterling is worth £50,000 a week. I think you've got to look at the generality of it and say, well, OK, to certain clubs that will be value, because, you know, if David had Raheem Sterling there and OK, there's the knock-on effect with his other players, but at the end of the day it comes down to what we were saying before in the break, that how you spend your money, and players' wages is a big issue, is it's relative to how other clubs around you spend the money, and therefore you have to go with the marketplace. Now, you know, if you can put a cap on how much you spend in terms of your turnover, then that means it's up to you. I think it's your decision as a club whether you want to give Raheem Sterling this, because he represents the future for you as opposed to a player who's just sort of sitting there.
It's a big ask, isn't it? So you've got a 17-year-old, or even somebody coming in, David, and it's 100 grand a week. And I know, forget budgets for a moment, I know you can't, but is there a mindset as a club owner that says this has got to stop?
No, I think that, to be honest, it'd be wonderful if we could pay him £100,000 a week.
Would you?
Well,
if you could afford to.
I think this is the point. I think the point is, if you're paying your staff, whether it be in football, whether it be in your business, more than the money than you are bringing in. In other words, your income is 10 million and your wages are 11 million, then this is madness. This is madness and has to stop. And that's why I say, with regard to that, it's okay if you pay him 100 million, as long as your football club is making money, as long as you're freezing, for example, which I'm an advocate of. We should be considering freezing of ticket prices. I think it's time that we would consider that. We all have to do it together. We can't do it in isolation. So I don't want to put a cap on anybody's wages. I want to earn what they're worth, what the market says they're worth, providing all of the clubs in a particular organisation, and whether it be the Premier League, whether it be the Championship, First Division, Second Division, it's all relative.
To create some sort of level playing field.
Look, the most painful thing that happens at a football club is when it goes into administration. Yeah. Relegation is awful, but nothing is as bad as administration. You will see fans on the street in tears. You will see them with buckets going around asking people. You tell me any company that goes bust and the employees stand outside looking for people to put money in a bucket, not a chance on this planet. But fans will. Why? Because they're emotionally involved with their football club. It's their life. They believe in it. Their father was a fan. Yes, their great-grandfather was.
It's a family tribal issue as well. Yeah. Christian, you probably won't have to do that for Manchester United, stand outside with the bucket. But as a professional sports person, or as a very successful sports person, do you look at some of these football salaries? And listen, I started my life as a football agent, so I'm part of this process. But do you look at it and go, this is unsustainable as a supporter?
Well, I like to go back to the youngsters, earning the big money. I feel that, at a young age, I think that the youngsters shouldn't get rewarded so quickly. I think you need to leave them be a bit more hungry. Let them starve a little bit.
So if Raheem comes in and says, I'm wonderful, I want £50,000 a week, he should be encouraged to talk down that position?
Yeah, I wouldn't, because me as a youngster coming through, I was a World Junior Champion, a double World Junior Champion. But in my training group, I was most probably the 6th fastest. I had a lot of senior guys older than me, and they kept me in my place. They told me straight, it doesn't matter if you've got a Nike sponsorship. It doesn't matter if everybody loves you. It doesn't matter if you've been on grandstand last Saturday. It doesn't matter. They kept my feet on the ground and kept me rooted.
That's very important, isn't it, for the youngsters?
Yeah, and if I never done that, I would never have succeeded as I've done in my career, because there's other youngsters that come after me that's been world's best, and they've been given the world, been given big contracts, and hasn't succeeded from it because they think it's all come too soon for them, and they think they've arrived already. And I think you have to hold them back a little bit, and that's what I believe.
Okay, I'd be stunned.
Okay, go on, David. Go on.
I'd be stunned if that young man demanded 50,000. I would say that's being driven by an agent.
Yeah, I don't think that's it.
A young man would just be thrilled at being part of
Manchester United. Do you not find the families get involved
United?
Though as well? The families see this as this is their passport out of wherever they are,
yes,
and they're using the lad to...
At that early stage, I think the driving force of the young man and the family will be to play for Manchester United, and the money would be secondary. The agent will then drive, and you would know this, John, would drive the demand.
We can get more. We can get more.
I haven't done it for sure. I've got a lousy contract here, so I'm not that good. Another Twitter come in from at TNC_Ash. David, that's you, David. Do you look at the clubs like West Bromwich Albion and Crewe and think more should be like them as a business? So do you look at that? I used to play for Crewe as well.
I did play for Crewe, yes.
I just had to throw that in.
I wasn't one of the youngsters.
Do you look at their models, David, and say, yes, football should be more like that?
Any good model, any good business model, and yes, you're right about West Bromwich Albion. I've always admired Jeremy Pearce, what he's doing there. But what I'm a great believer in is that we all follow the same rules. And West Brom are doing it in isolation. As a rule, for example, if you in isolation decide that you're going to charge your fans nothing to come in to watch the football, to watch the match for a season, in other words, free season tickets, you will go bust. You will either get relegated or worse, you'll go bust. if all the teams in any league were to say, we are going to do away with ticket pricing altogether, and I'm exaggerating to make a point, if they all agree to it, they're not all going to go bust. They're all going to survive and prosper.
So it's a uniformity. If you
absolutely,
look
that's
across,
the key to it.
Look across the water at the NFL and the NBA and the NHL and organisations, sporting organisations like that, where they try and uniform the playing field, that's where we should be going with the Premier League and the Championship. Thank you. Very quickly, Mark.
You come to a fundamental problem. If you're a sports administrator, what's your job? Your job is actually to maintain competition and reinvent it every year, so you maintain a level playing field. That's what you try and achieve. If you're in a business, what's your job? Your job is to kill off the competition. So actually, you've got a conflict before you start. So professional sport does have to be managed.
The administrators have a large responsibility, because if Manchester United are flying but they've got no one to play, then there's no competition. Gentlemen, hold for a second. We'll be right back. We are going to take a small break now. Then we're coming back with Peter Herbert from the Society of Black Lawyers, and some issues that I'm sure you'll want to be part of. Don't go away. Good evening and welcome back again to the forum. Now, tonight we're going to crowd the studio. I'm going to introduce you to Peter Herbert from the Society of Black Lawyers. In fact, Peter is the chair of the Society of Black Lawyers. Peter's been in the news quite a lot recently, and I want to start by asking Peter, first of all, are you a football fan?
I am when it's Brazil playing. I love internationals. I love watching the Africa Cup. But from my background is actually rugby. So I suppose yes and no would be the answer. Okay,
because you've pontificated quite a lot on football over the last couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Is it something that you have in your head, or is it just part of the work of the chair of the society?
Well, in a sense, it's always been our work, because we started getting involved with hate crime. And as you're aware, that hate crime and football have an unfortunate history over many years, which has obviously improved a lot in recent times. And so we addressed this around the time of the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And we did a lot of work with the Metropolitan Police and others around identifying those who associated themselves with football and used that as a cover or a recruiting ground for the British National Party and others. And I think in recent years we were concerned that whilst much progress has been made, and we worked with people like Lord Ouseley for many years, that it appeared to have become fashionable, unfortunately, to have racial abuse in the Premier League. And we were seriously concerned that there is a spillover about that to the grassroots game.
Okay. There's a lot of discussion around this point, because yes, some people are going to say it's a platform, and actually as a society we're racially mixing considerably better than we have been for a while. I'm going to ask you not to comment on that just for now, because I have Daniel Harris who has Skyped us in, and we can have you on the screen. Daniel, are you there?
I'm here. Hello.
Hello, Daniel. You've got an enhanced panel. What's your question?
I don't think I don't have a particular question. I thought we were going to discuss some issues.
As I understand it, you were interested to talk about racism in sport, and it's one of the reasons why Peter's here.
Well, I think what's interesting about what Peter said, I actually feel like I agree with him on quite a lot of the points, but I think with regard to today's issue of institutional racism in football, I think before we start talking about that, we probably need to define our terms. So given that it's Peter who's used the term, I'd be interested if he could define what he means by institutional racism, and then after that, we can kind of talk about whether it exists or not.
Peter.
Well, the term originates from Lord Scarman in the 1981 reports on the Brixton riots. It was then coined by Lord Macpherson when he addressed racism, institutional racism, in the Metropolitan Police. And his description is appropriate. It's policies and practices, unwitting or otherwise, which lead to a differential treatment within an organisation on grounds of race, nationality, colour, ethnic origin, etc. And I think when we look at the FA at all levels, we see a board where I think there was the first woman elected, appointed, after 143 years. The only person of colour, as I'm aware, on the board. If you look down to how they record racial incidents, these are just examples because I'm limited in time, that the FA record racial incidents not on the Macpherson definition, which is now 14 years old, but on the basis of if an official at the level of the county FA think it is such. And that really is way behind what most institutions do.
Let me hold
so
you there.
Those are just two examples.
Let me hold you there for a second.
Certainly.
Mark, I guess you're the obvious place for me to go first. You were Chief Executive of the Football Association that Peter's just referred to. How would you how would you respond to what Peter's just said?
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear Peter sort of define institutional in that respect, because I think a lot of people, and this is partly one of the problems with delivering the term institutionally racist, when you talk about an organisation like that, what does it mean to the general public? And it doesn't mean the precise definition that you've just given. And that's partly the danger in which it's delivered, which I think a lot of the angst is around the way in which it's being delivered. And I was speaking to people today who were former colleagues of mine who have left the FA and feel, quite honestly, they feel affronted by it because of the lack of definition. My understanding was that what you were saying was exactly that, and that is that this isn't about necessarily saying all the guys who operate in the organisation that their motivation is that they are racist, but that's how it's taken and that's how it's read. And that's what I think is probably at issue here. Because if you start to make statements like that, which go out to the general public, you're using the media, you're on the television here, you're using the press, then the people who read it will take that view. And I think if you start to do that, then that starts to make it divisive. And that is the issue. With regard to my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're not saying that the people are racist. There is evidence that would lead you to believe that there's, if you like, I could call it systemic racism potentially. And if you look at the Stephen Lawrence issue, for me, that was the big thing. It was to move on and look at the systemic racism issues. So things that happen almost inadvertently as a consequence. Now let me just, if you bear with me, let me just take those two issues. For me, let's separate the professional game from the grassroots game for a very obvious reason. And that is that whenever you talk to people about issues, football issues, they will gravitate to the professional game. Because that's the one that has the platform, that's the one that has the 8, 10, 12 pages of coverage. And as a consequence, it's not surprising that the organisations around football will actually try and deal with those issues which are on that platform at that level that everybody sees. So if you're looking at it, you'd say, well, okay, let's look at what goes on. Now, we may disagree about the way in which they applied their rules in terms of John Terry. The organisation, from my perspective, from the outside looking in, and you made the point about David Bernstein before, I think he's been a force for good at the FA, let me say that. Because I actually think he does take issue, he's cognizant of what's being said in the media, but I don't think he's a slave to the media. And he's said in this particular issue that what he will do, sorry, this is a long explanation, but what he will do is he will look at the tariffs. So, okay, responsible organisation responding to the tariffs. Let me then take another issue, whereby I really think it does get to the core of the systemic nature, potentially the systemic nature of racism within the game. That is about where there's underrepresentation at an employment level. So we all know there's an underrepresentation as regards black coaches, ethnic coaches, not just black, and what has happened in that regard. In 2011, pre-Terry, so it isn't a response to Terry, what they have put in place is, and I'm not at the FA, I'm not speaking for the FA, but I do know they put in place a coaches bursary programme. That programme is in its first year. They've got 47 guys coming through. It was targeted at ethnic communities, but it was open. So in other words, it allowed white people to be involved as coaches, but it was targeted at the ethnic communities, and it is basically largely ethnic. So, sorry, there's 47, you asked me the question, there's 47 of those guys in there. More importantly, 50% of those guys are now working with academies. So for black players walking around, and any other ethnic persuasion, they will see their role models there. The real issue for me, which I think is the one that if I'm to take any good out of the way you've delivered your comments, I have to say, the real issue for me is that grassroots is a difficult one, because I don't pretend to know, and I've played 17 years of pro and 30 odd years at grassroots. I know the grassroots from Merseyside Sunday leagues right the way through. My daughter's referee in grassroots at this point in time. But for me, I couldn't say I honestly understand the racism issue at grassroots. The government, and I'm nearly finished, the government has just got a DCMS report that needs to be answered by the FA. And interestingly, they highlighted this issue with potentially an issue in grassroots. And they've asked the FA for their comment. So I would wait until I hear the FA's response, which is due at the end of this year, to that particular issue before I went on about
Well,
grassroots.
you certainly answered the question. Thank you for that.
Sorry about that.
Peter, I am going to come back to you, but I do want to ask, and I know you have some points to make.
Yes.
I do want to ask David, because David and I talked about this briefly before we went on air tonight, that racism pervades all of our society. We didn't particularly think there was an overt amount of it in our game. David?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and so far I found this quite heavy. So I'm
Sorry about that.
No, generally speaking, and I can only tell you as I find, and I am sensitive, very sensitive to any form of racism, which I experienced as a young man and later on in my life. So I've suffered the real pain of racism. So I'm sensitive to it. But then I will go on and say to you that then when I got involved in football, and I've been in football for 20 years, and I was 5 years on the FA, at the FA, I have not seen institutional racism. I've seen and heard racist comments. I've not actually come across a racist footballer, or indeed any member of the council, and I was there 5 years. In fact, what I did see was a constant drive towards improving. For example, black referees were required, black people were always, if there was any opportunity to bring black people into the FA Council, then I always felt that if it happened, they would get a slight advantage. And of course, many Jewish people were on the council. In football, I have not experienced it in all of 20 years.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm definitely not ignoring you. I have Daniel who asked the question. I want to get him to ask his view, and then Peter, the floor's yours. Daniel, you've heard what
right, because I was interested in what David
thoughts?
was saying about never experiencing racism, and for me, I'm also Jewish. I write about football for a living, and I watch football, and I follow my team, so I have quite a wide experience of football. And I don't think what we're talking about here is so much is racism on the terraces, but we talked about institutional racism, and I think what Peter's talking about in his definition of institutional racism is looking at the way that clubs, and the ones that have been particularly under scrutiny, so that's Liverpool and Chelsea, have handled the accusations of racism and racist abuse against two of their players. And to me, when I think about what Peter's definition is, and I think it's something that we all need to think about, then we need to ask whether this isn't evidence of institutional racism. John Terry racially abused Anton Ferdinand. What happened? He got a 2-week fine. He's still the captain of Chelsea, and that was all that happened. In any other walk of life, that's not what would have happened. But because they think he's good at football and has a value, then that is more important than what he's done. And it's the same with Luis Suarez. Luis Suarez did what he did, he admitted it, and then he got a ban of 8 games, which again, when you think about a couple of weeks ago, Colaccini got suspended for 3 games for not kicking Luis Suarez. He got suspended for 8 games for repeatedly racistly abusing another player. Liverpool took apparently no action against the player. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at an FA that is handing out very minor punishments for fairly significant racist infringements, and then we're looking at clubs that are doing absolutely nothing. They're not even insisting that the players in question apologise to the people to whom they've been racist against. John Terry gave a very broad-based apology that clearly he'd been it looked a lot anyway. Can't say clearly because I don't know, but it looked a lot like he'd been told to say those things. He never directly apologised to Anton Ferdinand. That he doesn't appear to have been prescribed any kind of rehabilitation either. And similarly with Luis Suarez, who took his ban, but months and months later, even as later as the summer, Luis Suarez was still complaining about how badly he'd been done to. And again, his club did absolutely nothing. And if we're taking as read now that what the 2 players in question have done effectively they've been found guilty of having done it, then the fact that their clubs took almost no action against them tells you the attitude that they have towards racism relative to the attitude that they have towards winning football matches. And
Okay.
it doesn't...
Yeah, but
Daniel,
Daniel, can I say that it's just a slight adjustment to that, is that they were not found guilty by a court of law.
No,
were
they
they?
weren't found guilty by...
And then you say in any walk of life there'd have been a greater punishment.
Well,
let me bring Peter in now.
I mean, just a reality check. I sit as an employment judge part-time, and I can tell you for a fact that in any employment situation, here, if you'd come out with that, the very least you'd get is a final written warning, and in many circumstances you'd be dismissed summarily for gross misconduct with racial abuse of that nature. I mean, and also the issue, and he's absolutely right, these weren't admitted. They were not admitted by John Terry for a considerable period of time. And an apology after 12 months is not much of an apology. So the institutional issues about what clubs do is Liverpool came out quite dramatically in support of somebody who had that allegation. If you did that as an employer, you yourself would find yourself in serious trouble, because it's tantamount to condoning and legitimising what happened. I mean, that's just one aspect. And when we've looked, we've actually gone to some of the grassroots clubs, Novara FC, for instance, in Leicester. We were there on Saturday morning. A group of very dynamic group of African and Asian young people running 12 teams in Leicestershire, were working actually with Leicestershire FA about a very serious incident of abuse by parents, allegedly by other players, to an under-15 side who are playing on a Saturday morning.
So you still maintain that there is a significant amount of racism in our sport?
Absolutely. And just on one dynamic, you know, we talk about black. Well, we use it politically. We mean everybody of colour. There is a suggestion that, well, there's a dramatic underrepresentation of Asian people in Premier League. They don't play football. Culturally, they're not suited to it somehow. But if you go around the country, up and down the country, there are thousands of people in the Asian community who are extremely good. In Leicester, we have some evidence that actually it was only when they started beating the football academies that they were actually looked upon as being good enough to be appointed.
Leicester City, who are owned by Thai gentlemen,
I mean,
have searched the world to bring Asian players.
It doesn't matter who owns it. Institutions is not driven by an individual. No, I think the comment that is made earlier, it's not about an individual.
At Asian footballers.
Yeah, but it is an issue which goes more than one individual, and therefore it is very important to look. And we're not saying that individuals in the FA are individually discriminating or racist, but the institution, as you've rightly pointed out, the policies and practices, they do not have to be deliberate, but if you take the exercise of discretion collectively, it has a serious impact. And it, in a sense, 20 years ago, prevented a lot of African Caribbean players coming through. They were relegated to certain positions, but not good enough to be captain.
I have to say, I would agree. It's not my opinion that can matter, but I would agree that 20 years ago, that may be the case. I think we've moved considerably since then. Mark, what would you say to
I'm just cautious because I've had my say and more than the other time I should have had. But I mean, I think that the point I would just reiterate. I agree with Peter with regard to the. You're a lawyer, so forgive me for being arrogant and agreeing with you in terms of. But the actual definition of institutional racism in itself, you know, if you unpick it, you can get to a position whereby you can find evidence that you know everything isn't right. I just think that to make that bold statement out there is damaging. And actually, if you're thinking about getting a message across, I actually think you should think, sorry, again, I am lecturing to you, I don't mean to, but you should think about maybe defining, the question was excellent. The question before was define institutional racism.
Mark, I'm going to bring in...
For me, I have to say, what I think that is important to me is what is a racist? I know what a racist comment is. It's quite clear to me because, you know, I've had racist comments directed at me for many times in my life. But what I do feel is that racism on a football pitch, I see the racist comment, but I don't see the racist in the man.
Can you define can I
just add this?
I was just going to say, for me as a youngster playing football as a young kid, you know, I remember, you know, most of the majority of the time I grew up in South Wales. The majority of the time I was the only black player on the pitch. Every now and again we play against a team where there was another black player, and if one of my mates made a racist comment to him, I'd have to say something to him. And he said, "I didn't mean you, I mean him," but that doesn't mean.
But
saying
Christian,
a
do you think
saying
there's racism in sport generally in the UK today?
I think there is some.
Is there institutional racism?
I wouldn't say that there's racism is as bad as it was 10, 20 years ago. But there is still an element of racism there.
Let me ask.
And for me, the only way to get rid of it is you've got to have zero tolerance.
No,
that's the way I look at it.
But I just want to get, from my point of view, I just see that there are two different things. And as I say, I've experienced it. And when you're saying that somebody is a racist on a football pitch, is he a racist? The comment's racist, but let me give you an example. I believe racism is premeditated. That is, if you premeditate, you are a racist. There's no question in my mind. If you write me a letter calling me an unpleasant racist comment, that you are a racist. No question in my mind about that at all. But are you a racist if in a combat on a football pitch and somebody kicks you and you turn around and you instantly say something terrible and then apologise? No, you can't. It's a moment of terrible pain.
I understand what you're saying, but for me, it's not acceptable.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying, but it's not acceptable.
But I also think from the FA's perspective, that's not an acceptable position either. A casual racist comments are not, and they've said that, and they've stood by that.
I mean, I think we get too cut up about comments. For the victim, and there is a victim, and we talked to some victims who were 14 years old, 13 years old, and they kept their cool. They didn't abuse back. They didn't fight. I would have fought, I think, as a kid, as a 14-year-old, and we had to. Yeah. That's how we dealt with it. So, but the abuse
is for the victim. Summary. I'm so sorry, Peter. We're coming into a commercial break. Just give me a 15-second summary.
For the victim,
quantify a racist.
For the victim, it doesn't matter. For that split second, it doesn't matter. We don't care. The impact on the victim is the thing that you have to remember. I'm not interested in judging that person's whole character. That comment is enough. Meant or not meant doesn't matter.
So much more to be said on this issue. I'd like to think, as a sporting nation, that we're addressing this seriously, because it is a serious issue. I thank you all for that. It was a very sensible and well-balanced discussion, and thank you, Peter, for sparing the time to come in this evening.
Pleasure. No, thank you.
We'll be back in 3 minutes. And you're very welcome back to the forum. Now, I know we're competing with an audience tonight who've got I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here on the other side. Sitting in this very studio with us on the forum, remember Hugo Taylor, with his discussions and his interest in football and in sport, and now he's up the jungle. So we wish him well tonight. We have a tweet at Matt Eagles. I'd like to ask Christian. Hello, Christian. If athletes sledge each other like footballers and cricketers, Christian, spill the beans, boy.
Do you know what? It's not too bad. In the sprinters' world, it can be a little bit like that.
Even before you get on the blocks, is it not?
Do you know what? I'll be honest. Since the Usain Bolt era's come in, it's changed. You know, when I first came into the sport, you still had the Morris Greens, the Linford Christies, and Kim Collins from St Kitts and Nevis is the worst. I never forget being in a call room in the World Championship final, 100-metre final. Myself and Dwayne Chambers were there, and we sat there quite quiet. And I remember Kim Collins was giving it some, and Bernard Williams was an American 100-metre sprinter. And Morris Green out of Bolden was walking up and down, and they thought they were the men, they were the main men, they were the favourites. But Kim Collins and I remember they were just giving it and giving it and giving it and giving it. And every time we'd walk up, they'd stand in front of them and they'd sit back down and say, "Go on, you can go past." So there used to be a lot of that. But since the Usain Bolt era has come through, sprinters have become very friendly, very, very friendly.
I remember watching Linford Christie, I think it was a World Championship, I think the one that he won, and I remember watching him on the line as he got himself in. Do you have to, to get, because you're all quick, You're all really quick. You're in split seconds of each other. Is it the guy who really visualises that finishing line that's going to cross the line first?
It is. You know,
take Usain Bolt out of that.
Because there's no room for mistakes. You know, it's 10 seconds or 20 seconds, and there's no room for no mistakes. You can't slip up here and there.
This is why I love sitting here, by the way, because I can ask people who I really admire proper questions. One more quick one before we go to our next question. The rule about the one striking out on sprinting. Do you agree?
I think there should be. You should have one chance. I think the field deserves. Yeah. No. The whole field deserves one chance, and then that's it. Then we go. Good to go.
Harsh.
That's why I think. I think they're doing it now for TV to obviously speed things up. But I think it is harsh. It is tough, and it showed last year in the World Championships in 2011 where Usain Bolt had a false start. And everyone's come and paid their money to watch Usain, and everyone makes mistakes, so you got to allow for that one mistake.
So he is human, sort of.
Sort of.
Nathan Lloyd, are you with us?
Evening, how you doing?
Hello Nathan, you're very welcome. We're doing fine, thank you. What would you like to ask the panel?
Just a very quick one really. It's directed at Mark and David predominantly. Does the panel think that in terms of running a football club, as David does, or Mark running the FA, the business acumen is more important than coming from a sporting background, which obviously Mark did, but David didn't particularly?
In other words, do you have to have played it to run it? David?
Say again?
Do you have to have played the sport to be able to run it
Oh,
properly?
I see. Well, in football, I think probably every owner and every person that's running a football club has probably played football. It's a question of at what level.
What level did you play?
Well, I played for West Ham Boys.
Okay.
I played for West Ham Youth, and the infamous Ted Fenton offered me professional terms. So that's as far as I got.
Was there a moment though when you walked in as owner of West Ham and you thought, "Oh my God, I played here"?
Oh, I mean, you pinch yourself because my story is just unbelievable. If you were to have a film of it, you'd watch the film and you say, well, this is all too far-fetched because, here is a little kid, 7-year-old kid, penniless urchin, and living in abject poverty, bunking in to watch his football club, and 50 years later, you're the owner.
You see, dreams can come true.
Dreams can come true.
Mark, do you have to be in it to win it?
No, is the answer, the short answer. Depends how much time you've got. I think that there is an issue with having a sensitivity to what I call the art form. And certainly when I was at PwC, I used to get a lot of jobs whereby the art form conflicted with economics. And that's the issue. Whether it was the Opera House, whether it was, I did a lot in that world, or football clubs. Everybody thinks we're here to have the football club and people, and it's putting the performance on the pitch or on the theatre, etc. And the economics can go hang themselves because you just need more and more cash. So I think it's having that balance, and having seen it from the inside, it's quite important. So I always used to say, yeah, I've been in the boardroom, but I've also been in the boot room, so I know what it's like. And groups of players, despite the fact we were saying earlier on, have changed over the years. Fundamentally, human beings haven't changed. By the way, my degree was in psychology and my qualifications in money, and I played 17 years at a pro club. So I actually find it quite a nice balance because I'm sensitive to the sport. At the moment, I'm a director of British Judo, and they call me a white belt. And what I say to them is, yeah, that's fine, but in the boardroom, I'm a black belt. And we get through it that way. But I think having a sensitive, anybody who's played professional sport or played sport at a high level, it gives you an insight.
That's the expression. It gives you an insight. Does it make you want to administer the sport? You see sports like athletics, and there are a raft of issues at the administrative level. Do you think, okay, I'm going to change this?
I do. I've been at the sport. I've been competing in sport at the highest level since I was 18 years old. It's 15 years now I've been at top level. And I've seen a lot of different head coaches come in, chief execs, and it seems like you go round in a cycle, and a new one comes in and they start to go all over again, and you just keep coming back to the same place. And I think to myself, it can't be that difficult. Obviously, running a business is that it's not easy. It's not an easy
Are there
thing.
obvious changes, and I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here now, obvious changes to the athletics world that you would want to make if you... I mean, I don't put yourself in an awkward position with any administrators that you need.
I ain't got a problem.
But is there anything that...
UK Sport are great.
UK Sport are fine. It's
Yeah,
just UK
absolutely.
Athletics.
Okay. Is there anything that irks you, anything that worries you about the sport in the future?
There are a couple of things that do worry me, but at the moment I'll admit I am happy. I was pleased when they appointed Charles 4 years ago, and now obviously Charles has moved on, Charles Van Comrie, and they've appointed Neil Black as performance director. Neil Black is someone who's been in the sport for a very long time, and he knows everybody from the top to the bottom.
And of course, Seb's gone in at British Athletics now. No, not at British,
he's
British
BO
Olympic.
Yeah, he's at the BOA now.
Yeah, well, that's sort of osmosis with you, doesn't it?
It kind of does. We bother with him every 4 years. That's it.
Okay.
Besides that, we're on our own UK Athletics.
Nathan, you've heard what a couple of the, well, all the lads have got to say. What do you think?
I mean, personally, I think, you know, when Mark took over from Adam Crozier, for instance, it helped. I think that a man, you know, he's come from a career with Tranmere, and I think was it Crewe?
It was Crewe. You're well informed.
I was close.
It was a long time ago.
Personally, I do think it helps that someone comes from a background, and you know, it's the same with coaching in football. You know, it is difficult to have respect for someone if they haven't perhaps been there and done that. And I suppose it's in any profession. If you walk in, if I walked in as a director of something I've got no interest in, they'd worry. So yeah, for me, it was just a personal opinion, and I think, you know, it helps if you've got a background in the industry. You're then probably in a better position to actually guide people underneath you.
Mark, let me, sorry, thanks Nathan, let me throw that at Mark for a second.
Yeah, Nathan, I think you touched on the point there. There's a difference between, if you like, running the business and running the technical side. And certainly on the technical side, if, for example, Clive Woodward came into football, I said to him he'd have to be successful from day one, because otherwise his credibility would be shot. Because the guys who if he had any sort of bad run-in period, he wouldn't have a honeymoon period, because the guy said, what's he know? He's a rugby guy. But when you're looking at, you know, you're talking about UK Athletics, and you're talking about there whereby there is an administrative role, and within that, you know, we look at performance directors. I'm looking at that at the moment with British Judo. You define what a performance director does. Should he be a head coach? Or should he? And it's very difficult to find a head coach. It's called, in business, it's called the Peter principle. You promote somebody to their own level of incompetence, and there they stay because they're incompetent. So, you know, a good salesman.
Fail upwards to you.
Yeah, a good salesman. What's the skills for a good salesman? He actually knows how to sell and relate to people. Is he a good sales manager? No, and that's a classic. And it happens a lot in sport, where you see, you know, good players make bad managers.
Would you hire a manager who hadn't been in the game, David?
Yes. I would hire the best man for the job. The odds are a Premier League club who hires a manager would hire somebody that's already successful. It's very rare that a Premiership club would hire somebody unknown. I mean, it's unheard of, I would have thought. I mean, I don't know, but that would be my guess.
Probably Christian Gross was the last time, I think.
But in the main, they come from, they're successful. That's why you bring them to the Premiership club. Where it starts is in the lower division, you know, and it has happened where in small divisions, lower divisions, a manager is appointed with no footballing background, and then if he fails, predominantly.
Just quickly before we go to the next break, the dissemination of director of football and coach. Could you give us a 2-minute summary?
Oh, well,
is that possible?
Well, no, I don't think it is possible. I mean, it is again a judgment. Managers hate the idea of there being a director of football.
We hear about it so much.
Yeah, they hate it. As a rule, an owner or a board will bring in a director of football because they need somebody between themselves and the manager. And it's almost admitting that this isn't working. So they can't get rid of the manager, or they feel they can't get rid of the manager, or they don't want to get rid of the manager. And there's the dichotomy. And I would say when you see that somebody's brought in as a director of football, there is an issue.
That I find fascinating. You see, these are the facts that you need to know. Nathan, thank you very much indeed. We've got to go for a quick break for a couple of minutes, but we will be back with a lot more. Don't go away. You're back in the forum, and we're going to our next caller. James White from somewhere. Actually, I know you're a Swansea fan. Where are you calling from, James?
Yeah, I'm a Swansea fan, but I live in Somerset, so
I guess it begins with an S. It's reasonably close, yes.
Every game.
What's your question, my friend?
Yeah, no, I guess the question I've sort of thought really is about the FA really, and obviously with Mark being interested in his view and David's view, but to me it seems the FA are losing respect, I think, of a lot of fans and people in the game, because I don't think they even grasp the real issues that fans and the players have, and I just wondered how the panel just thought about how they can go about changing its image and approach to ensure they regain some element of status amongst the wider football community, really.
Just before I pass that over to the panel to answer, could you just quantify respect? Because I mentioned that at the top end of the programme, we respect each other and there's no respect for referees and da-da-da-da-da. What respect factor do you think the FA are lacking in towards the supporters?
I don't know, I just generally think that the FA are seen as a bit of a joke to amongst the wider football community. I don't think they... I think people see them as a bunch of men in suits and not actual real people that really understand football and what it's about, if I'm honest with you. And actually, I think a lot of the players that, some of the stuff, the way they've handled the Clattenburg stuff, the racism issues recently, I just think it stems of an organisation that just seems out of touch, basically, with the modern football fan. And I don't know, to me it feels like they're just no longer in touch with real people and real issues.
Okay. Where shall I begin with that? Mark.
Hi. The first thing is, I'll narrow it down, but if you look at this country at the moment, virtually every institution in this country is under attack, be it the police, the media, the BBC. And having said that, I think it's always been pretty easy to have a cheap shot at the FA, and I'm not an apologist for the FA. Certainly, my perception of it as a player, if I played in the amateur leagues, was that they were almost an irrelevance. They just basically handed out fines if I got booked or whatever. And when I went to the FA, I looked at it, and the first thing that struck me was it was a place where there are a lot of highly motivated people working in it, in the executive team. And you've got to distinguish between the FA as the executive team, and then you've got the council who are again, much maligned. And then I remember saying to the guys, because again, everybody focuses on the professional game and Team England and all that kind of stuff, but actually you then start to look at what this organisation is doing down and through the grassroots. And I remember saying to the guys, look, this is the greatest story never told, which surprised me, because actually it had a guy who was from the media prior to me, and yet they never told people the extent to which they were investing in the grassroots game and the stuff that they've done over the years. Having said that, there are times when they don't help themselves in terms of the way they manage the media, and in fact they've been very much averse to dealing with the media. And only today, people have said to me, from Sky actually, they said to me, well look, the guys at the FA never really talk to us, and they'd rather say nothing and therefore allow the whole thing to go on. My view when I was at the FA, there's a lot of stories which the media will personalise and polarise, and with those ones I tended to try and say, well, let's get out the press, not knock the ball back over the table and therefore the game's over. With regard to ones such as racism, this isn't going to go away, so you do have to stand up and you do have to be counted and you do have to be careful. And of course, when that's wrapped around things like disciplinary matters, they don't want to influence them in any way, shape or form by making statements out in the media. So there is a sort of a bit of a catch-22. And in fairness, I often say to people, when they make a decision, because it's a judgment call, when they make a decision, think about the alternative decision that they could have made, and actually do you think that I've got stick for that? And the answer is probably they would in most cases.
As a football fan, Christian, would you go along with that? Do you think the Football Association do a fair job? And pertinently, things like racial harmony or lack of it recently, is that do you think that they're handling that correctly?
To me, it seems like they're a little bit lost at times. That's what it's coming across. But obviously they are doing good things in the background. You can see that with the new academy. The
St George's Academy is a good point.
Yeah, which is fantastic facility from what I hear. Yeah. There are things which they are doing, But like Mark said, sometimes they don't help themselves by coming out and just speaking. And I think that's what the problem is. They're not coming out and saying what needs to be said, you know. And with the racist issues, they're not dealing with them in the right way. They're just being left up in the air, and the media are going to make their own assumption. And you know, the media, you can't leave it in the media's hands because
that's the problem, isn't it?
they will put a bad
Even though we all
spin on
love
it.
the media, of course. David, they teach you at law school that you know it's difficult in a board meeting to have more than 7 directors. They have a general council of 92 members. How do you deal with an organisation
well,
like
there's
that?
92 members, and I'm sure Mark will tell you that's difficult. But however, there is a board of directors. I think it's 12 now. And that's made up also of the professional game, which we've moved on in the last 20 years. At one time, of course, there were no professionals at the FA. Now you have Premier League representation, you have representation from the Football League. So it's slowly but surely you're getting these people, along with the grassroots. Remember that the FA been there for 150 years. They've overseen the growth of football that is no other sport in living memory has improved in the way that it has. They get the blame for everything that goes wrong. Remember, they oversaw the magnificent Wembley Stadium. I mean, you know, it is a stunning. I mean, you know, there's lots of arguments about its overcosting and so on and so on.
I mean, yeah,
but nevertheless,
right. You wait for a comeback twice in 4 years.
Absolutely superb. And of course now with St George's. So there's a lot of good things that they've done, and I think that we should celebrate that rather than constantly see them as a group of suits, which of course they are.
James?
Not that they are. I didn't mean that.
James,
would I rewind the tape there?
It's all right, they actually got it. Would you agree with David's group of suits in the correct manner?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that they don't do good stuff. I mean, being blunt though, not be funny guys, I think that misses the point somewhat, because I'd expect an organisation with really a turnover of that amount of money and that many people to do some good things. If they didn't do that, then they wouldn't be in their position anyway. I just think the problem is, what my point was, I don't think they grasp the real issues, and I don't think they fit in the modern world to what modern day fans are, and that's the bit that I think they miss. They might do a lot of good things, and I'm not having a cheap shot at them. It's not about that, but I think many fans today just think that they're just a bit adrift from that. And your point about the media, they don't communicate very effectively, is exactly the point. We're in a modern world where the media is on the go on a regular basis, and the FA don't seem to engage and communicate and do things in the speed in which most people.
Hold on 1 second, Joe. I just want to bring Dave. I just want to bring David in for a second.
James, can you hear me? James, what I'd be saying to you is ask yourself, what would you do as an alternative? It's all very well maligning this organisation that's done a lot of good things. Of course they've made mistakes. They're a huge organisation responsible for thousands and thousands of football clubs around the country. Ask yourself, what would you put in place? Changes are happening for the good. Ask yourself, what would you do to replace an organisation that is 150 years old and also is constantly evolving and constantly improving.
David, Mark, has David Bernstein done a good job?
Yeah, I think he has actually, because James, just to my point on the media, I think when he first came in, he was clearly responsive to it, and my concern was, as I say, he was going to be a slave to the media, where they drag you and pull you and push you and say, go and tell Sepp Blatter that he's a bad man. Actually, to follow that particular tack is not the best way to do what you need to do in Europe, which is to start, and FIFA, which is to create a platform and not be the hectoring, lecturing Englishman. But over the period, I actually think he's grown into the job. I mean, it's very arrogant of me to say that. And I think he responds better to the media. But generally, take for example, the issue about recording referees.
Yes.
I mean, I've not heard anything on that particularly. So I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think it's a no-brainer. There isn't an industry in the world where the key skill of the guys involved, for example, and I think David would accept this, a referee is about man management. He has 4 or 5 big decisions to make. Yeah. He has to get most of those right most of the time. The rest is about man management. And actually, you have the technology to listen to his man management and to be able to give him feedback, to sift out the ones that aren't doing so well and tell him. So for no other reason, it's a no-brainer why you don't actually use those recordings properly. But they've been silent on that, and I think that's the issue, that if they started to grasp some of those, yes, they've got to think them through and think about all the different stakeholders, but a bit more sort of that would help me.
Yep. James, thank you very much for your time. Are you a modern fan, Christian? Would you call yourself a modern fan? The game has changed a little bit. Are you a modern fan?
Yeah, I'm definitely a modern fan.
Okay.
Definitely.
Well, even at 60, I'm a modern fan.
Well, you
We're
don't
gonna
look it.
I was fishing and somebody caught, fortunately.
I wasn't going to give it to you.
I know you weren't.
There's a sore point from that. I was 60
You
last
weren't
Friday.
Happy birthday.
Well, we're all going to sing happy birthday while we go away for 2 minutes. Don't you dare not come back. See you in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to the forum. Interesting discussions tonight, and as we said at the top end and during the programme, don't forget to tweet us, call us, Skype us. We've got another tweet I want to read out from at Riccieri. Oh, I've got to pronounce it. Richie Rich Gunner, maybe Gunner. Does Sky Sports News' sensationalist and speculative approach to reporting damage football's image? Does the sport come second? Interesting question this. So what Richie Rich is saying is the sensationalisation of Sky's coverage, which we all know has been very good for the sport, is actually now gone beyond that, and it's actually becoming marginally harmful for the sport. How would you, as a recipient of Sky's money, but also very much part of the Sky product, how do you feel about that?
I think Sky has been absolutely unbelievable. I think they've been brilliant. I think they've the quality, the coverage, every aspect of Sky every year has improved. The actual football fan watching matches on Sky must be thrilled, as indeed I am. Even if you extend that to 3D and the way they analyse, it's true that they analyse everything to death. However, I think that what it does, sadly, it highlights the errors that are being made by referees, and therefore that's causing an issue. But I don't think it's beyond the wit of man to use this technology.
How do you feel about that, by the way? I mean, everything is captured now. I mean, the new technologies that are around.
It's what we want. It's, you know, it's like,
want more of that.
Don't be King Canute. You know, you cannot stop the tide. This is absolutely, it is what it is. They are brilliant at what they're doing. The fans love it and hate it because they hate it because they see the ball hit the stanchion at the back of the goal and it comes out and the referee says play on and it's clearly a goal.
Yeah.
And how do we know it's clearly a goal? Because we're watching it on television.
Has this helped the game? I mean, yes, look, the obvious question is yes, and the money and the support have been fantastic. Now we get into the bit of the nitty-gritty, you know, the way that it exposes referees and players to a degree, etc. Are they driving an agenda of sensationalism now for their own predilection? I know they paid for it, but is that right?
I think with everything like this, it's a balance, and with the benefit comes the burden. And I think, you know, David has just clearly articulated the benefits you get from the coverage from Sky. To be quite honest, you know, that's an editorial decision, and you know, I think if you look at it from a positive perspective, which I do, it can be very helpful to the game in terms of, just for example, in so many ways, in so many unseen ways. I mean, I changed the disciplinary system in 2004, and one of the things that enabled me to do it, which is to speed it up and actually take the lawyers out, because I looked at this and said most of these issues, I'd been on fraud trials as a witness, not as a defendant, but I've been on fraud trials, and you know, football issues, they're not really that complex. Did he elbow him? Did he kick him? Did he go over there? In most issues, so actually they can be sorted out. And yet we were seeing, when I remember when I went to the FA, I think Joe Cole was suspended for West Ham. Sorry, was sent off at West Ham and was then suspended playing for Chelsea the following season. And actually, in the between times, a lawyer had been in and had a fest on it and had his fees. And my view was, well, close it down, kick the lawyers out, accelerate the thing, and then start to take it closer to complying with FIFA statute, but not quite. The benefit of the technology was that was now going to be streamed in. And so I just picked all those, thank you very much, and we were able to do that. That's one of the benefits that people don't see. I think the other issues are, do we have things to hide in the game? And if we haven't, let's get it out there. You know.
And would you embrace what's coming? The social media revolution that's going to be the next part of Sky's and anyone else's coverage. And let me just load the question backwards as well. Are we going to welcome BT in? We've had Setanta, we've had ESPN. Are we a bit foot weary now? Are we going to welcome these guys? And is this the new dawn of another new era in
well,
I think to the next level?
I think having competition in a marketplace is good, because competition immediately means the price is going to stay up. My concern is that the competition would go out, and then you're into negotiating with one party, and actually your television monies are not going to go up. So that particular aspect is beneficial to the game. If you're talking about social media, I mean, I absolutely, maybe I'm showing my age, but I actually don't find it fantastic. And I've just been waiting for the changes that are occurring as a consequence.
I know you tweet. In fact, you're very well known, and you, I think, Christian.
Occasionally,
well.
not as often as I should.
It's beginning to revolutionise the way that we do things and the way that we enjoy things like football. Do you obviously do embrace that? Where do you see that going? What's going to happen next in the social media?
Even Mark will ultimately be a tweet.
Will you be a twit, Mark?
I don't think you can stop it. I think it's like going back to King Canute again. I think it's ongoing.
I've got another tweet coming from Jamie in Sheffield. It's a bit easy to pronounce that one. Is it a disgrace that the future of the Olympic Stadium is still not resolved? Christian?
It does sadden me a bit that it hasn't been resolved.
It's not going to be used for some time as well.
Yeah, so I'm hearing. I hear it's not going to be used until 2015, which is a shame. You know, for me, being in that stadium is something that will always live with me, always. And
how did you feel when you walked in there?
Oh, it was amazing.
Sorry, crass question, but you got to ask it.
No, but I was in lane 3, and you always listen to the athletes being announced. Yeah. Lane 1 was being announced, lane 2, and then they were being announced. And I just heard this almighty roar. This roar was just crazy, and I thought Goldie Sayers was also in the building. It was also in the stadium, was throwing the javelin. I thought, oh, she's throwing the qualifying. So I looked up at the screen to see, and it was just me. I didn't even hear my name being announced. The roar was just.
Does it make you go shivery?
It was hard. It was hard to describe that feeling at that moment when the roar went up.
Iconic moment. I have to ask you, and it's a little difficult for me to ask David this because I know he's very involved, but we will see how close we can get to David. Can the Olympic Stadium be used as a football ground?
Well, I think as a football fan, you'd want to take the track up. You know, so the stands can be closer to the football pitch. As an athlete, and you know, as an Olympian, I would love the track to be stay there and be used, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be hard.
Wherever you can, David. I know some of this is subject to C.
Yes, some of it's difficult, but I think.
When is this going to be resolved?
Well, hopefully soon. But you know, it's been going on a long time. I think it's sad because I think the momentum that the Olympics brought for us. I mean, it was a phenomenal success, a huge success, highlighted by, you know, a great stadium and a great event. And it's sad that we're not keeping that momentum going. And the delays, for us, we started off at 2014 that we'd be in there, you know, if we won the bid. And then if we won the bid, we were hoping to be in there by 2015. The latest, it now looks like 2016, which I think is a terrible shame because the momentum will clearly be lost.
Can I ask? I don't know. I may be being naive, but can there be retractable seats for whoever goes in as a football stadium to come up onto the track?
Well, I think first of all, it would be sad if we don't continue having an iconic stadium. And you can't really have an iconic stadium. The legacy clearly states that we are going to retain the facility for athletics. We are committed to that. West Ham Football Club is committed to retaining that. After all, Seb Coe, on behalf of all of us, he said, this will remain an athletic stadium. We are committed to that. But you can't tell the world one thing and then a few years later say, oh no, we've changed our minds. That's not honourable and not right. So we, West Ham Football Club, are committed to the legacy of the athletic stadium. Now, if you want to retain that stadium as an iconic, world iconic stadium, which embraces football, which I think is important because I think you need the volume of people to make it viable, then you need a stadium that is going to be football friendly. Now, to be football friendly, you can't leave it as it is. You have to change it. So you have to keep athletics and you have to embrace football. To do that, you would need some form of demountable seating, whether it's retractable, whether it's demountable, but not beyond the wit of man.
David, you tiptoed through those tulips with great professionalism. We're going to be back with you in a few minutes, 2 minutes in fact, 3 minutes in fact. Last part, please don't go away, got lots more to come. And welcome back for the very final part of the forum tonight. So we're going to try and get 2 calls in very quickly. We have Scott Johnson. Are you there? Yes, you are. Scott, hello. What's your question?
About fan ownership, it's just to see, can it work at the highest level of British football?
Can fan ownership work at the highest level in British football? David Gold.
I've never known it to work. There have been fan ownership over the years.
Portsmouth are about to try it, I understand.
And you know, I wish them well. But history tells me that it doesn't, that it doesn't work. But that's not to say that, that it can't. With a fair wind and good people, proper people in there, maybe. But when you get a committee, you get the bigger the committee. We've been talking about the FA having 100 odd people that are voting.
Yeah.
It's the old story that you're asked to design a horse and you end up with a camel.
Yeah. Well, look, just before you go, Scott, because we have very little time, you got your answer from David. I just wanted to throw something at you because I know you're a Rangers fan. The verdict, I understand, is due next Tuesday or Wednesday with the Inland Revenue. Just a thought I'm going to leave you with. The £84 million fine would and has brought Rangers down. If it comes in, if the revenue case is won by them and it comes in at anything less than 50 million, 40 million, 30 million, they could have survived. So Tuesday, Wednesday is going to be a fascinating day for you. I just thought I'd leave you with that thought. Thank you very much, by the way. Sean, welcome to the forum.
Hi.
How are you, my friend?
So I'm, in 1986, when West Ham came third in the league, I stood on the South Bank terrace at Bowling Ground and stood for the whole game. I'm now a season ticket holder for the Sir Trevor Brooking Lower, and I stand in front of my seat. So my question is about safe standing. My understanding is there's no law against standing. It just says every ground must have a seat for every fan. It's the league that say that fans should sit down and they can eject people if they don't. And it seems to be different from ground to ground. My question to the FA, the government and clubs is, isn't it time to review it? Isn't it time to support some safe standing now?
Mark Palios.
I thought this may come to me, Sean, but unfortunately I don't know what the exact rules are on this. But what I would say is that it's been a perennial problem. We've just gone through the recent sort of re-look at Hillsborough, etc., which was really where it all sort of started from. And I think you actually put the preface in front of this, which was safe standing. My personal view is that there certainly seems to be a desire for it. As long as safety is paramount, that's the issue. And in fact, every sort of club owner, every administrator bows and defers to what the police and the local authorities say in terms of whether matches are safe or otherwise, and you never go against that, and that's the prime rule. So if you can devise a safe one and a safe standing area, then yeah. The other side to it, of course, is that people who actually you've seen an increase and a change in the cross-section of the audiences of spectators at grounds because you've had seats. You've seen a lot more families and women and children. So I can see the argument both ways, but I'd be happy if it was safe.
Mark, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to ask David, especially as the questioner is a West Ham fan. Quickly, David, your thoughts.
Yes, Sean. What I would say to you is that I've recently seen a German model of safe standing. It actually is a seat, but you leave the seat up and you can stand there, and then for other functions they can actually drop the seat down very quickly with a mechanism. So it can be done, and I think that we should at least take a look at it, not close our eyes to the fact.
Would you have that at West Ham, David?
If I had got the Olympic Stadium, I'd certainly consider it there.
Now there's an answer. Final word, Christian, is going to come to you. What do you think about standing, safe standing at football grounds? Is that what you want?
To me, I quite enjoy sitting there and going to the game and watching it. But yeah,
you're getting old now. You see.
No, I'm not getting old. But if you go to a good game, you need to stand up. You need to stand up. If it's a good gripping game, you need to stand up.
I come from a culture where you listen to your customer, and I think that that's why you should just give this a little thought.
Nearly the final word. I'm going to give the final word to Sean.
Well, I look forward
Would you rather be standing
at the Olympic Stadium very soon then, that means.
Nice one.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Christian Malcolm, David Gold, Mark Palios, and all of our viewers and our listeners. I actually want to say thank you also to Chris and Rob Gordon in Northern Ireland, who have been very supportive of this programme over the last few weeks, so thanks to you. It's been some interesting discussions. I thought the point on the racial issues and the usage of the Olympic Stadium were particularly pertinent. Thanks for being around. We'll see you again next time. Good night.